Well, we could start with the treats around 11, and then, I mean, I don't know what your schedules are, that's just throwing out a number. And then, instead of people trying to leave and come back,
Yeah.
as that finishes, then we could just start a little celebration or a little luncheon together. What, I mean, it's up to,
That's middle of the day on Saturday.
that's a proposal, that's,
That's fine with me. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We
yeah,
got
I mean, that way people's not trying to leave and come back, and we can sort of, unless you had an appointment at midday.
So is it gonna be a lunch? We'll bring stuff for lunch?
Well, we'd bring some snacks. Well, you,
So is it snacks or is it lunch? I mean, what do we bring?
well, originally I was just throwing out there to just bring some little finger food snacks, something that we celebrate with.
Would you rather do that, or would y'all rather go down to, Best Foods?
Look at him smile.
I like best foods. Yona, let's do that then, after we do the treat bags, lunchtime, we'll saddle up and,
Let's plan on doing that.
okay,
Let's plan on going down to Best Foods and just having a good meal,
okay.
time of fellowship, and,
We'll plan to do that then, after we'll gather together, do the treat bags, get them ready to distribute out on Sunday, and, cause we was gonna plan, give them out on Sunday, wasn't we? Or just
Yeah.
the last Sunday
That's what
before
we
Christmas.
usually do, yeah.
Okay, good.
and, I'll take care of that meal. For everybody to eat. Is that all right with everybody? I'll make sure it pays for it.
Thank you.
Okay.
So then, he said for everybody to just fast from Friday night
That's right.
to Sharon looked up.
I know, the time that he set that shop, cause I haven't done any Christmas shopping, cause I hadn't had money, so.
It's
Don't feel bad, I know we do nothing either.
What, you gonna take care of the whole church in one swipe? That's quick.
Christmas tree look like the Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown's tree.
All right, okay. There's nothing else then, let's go into our classes.
Yeah, we're going to class. I'm usually in class. All right, we did. Okay, take that one. All right.
I'm over the beach.
It's okay, it's okay.
We want to tell you about this, I don't know if anybody's interested, but
Oh, we,
it's, I think it'll be kind of neat.
Yes, we okay.
all right, Bonnie just handed me something to read, something that she had picked up. It looks like they're having like a Christmas celebration at Belmont Methodist Church. Any of y'all know where that's at? It's right there on 49, going towards Burlington. It's going to be Sunday, December the 21st from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. It says, come and join us. Fun, food, ugliest Christmas sweater contest, and a worship time referencing the movie Elf. And it says you don't want to miss it. And I don't know if any of y'all ever seen that movie, but the Elf, Buddy the Elf. But all right, I've done what I was asked to do. Now, all right. The joy of a new beginning. That was the title of our lesson today. And I'm going to try to kind of stick a little bit to the lesson, but I'm probably not gonna follow the lesson as closely as I normally do. Cause why? Because most of us already know the story of what happens, right? We're piggybacking right on last week's lesson. What happened last week? Last week we know that the Jewish people got the command from the king of Persia to go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple and start worshiping their God. And that's where we're starting today. They've made it back to Jerusalem. And they're talking about the new beginning. Talking about setting up an altar to the Lord and starting over. Why had they been carried away in captivity? All right, that's a good place to start. All right, well let me read the session overview first, and then we'll start into that. It says, although spiritual failure among the Jewish people and their leaders had resulted in 70 years of exile from their beloved homeland, which was the answer to the question I just asked you, the memories of better days still lingered. Today's study from the Old Testament continues Ezra's graphic account of how God opened the door for their return to Jerusalem. The first time of their agenda after getting settled in their homes was to begin the project of rebuilding the altar of burnt offerings and the temple of worship. It involved going back to the sacred place of God's holy presence that they had been forced to leave. They had to start with rebuilding the altar of sacrifice on its old foundations, and the altar had been restored. They could then begin the task of restoring the temple that had been desecrated and demolished by their enemies. A key to the whole process was that it was all done in God's time and in accordance with what was written. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way. There were powerful emotions involved in this process, including the fear of the people around them who opposed to rebuild the altar and the restoration of the temple. But it all climaxed with great shouts of joy when there's visible evidence that they once again could offer the appointed sacrifices at the place of God's presence. All right, now I said all that to get started into the lesson. We've all read the Bible, or parts of it. Most of us all have read the book of Genesis. And ain't it amazing how when we start the Bible off, it says, in the what?
Beginning.
In the beginning. What does the beginning mean?
Start of something,
The start of something what?
something new.
Something new, that's right. Because I remember whenever I began school, right?
Yeah.
And I went into kindergarten, had a great time. And then, lo and behold, I had to transfer into elementary school, first grade. Totally different place than where I went to kindergarten. Some people were able, I think Jerry and Sharon actually went to the same kindergarten that they got first grade, but I didn't. I actually went to kindergarten in Greensboro. And then I went to Liberty School for first grade. So I had two beginnings. And then a third, a second, a third, and fourth. Because why? Because at some point in time, we all graduated from middle school and got to go to high school, which was a totally different place.
Yep.
Wasn't even on the same property. Matter of fact, it was about 12 miles further down the road. I knew it was 12 miles because we used to skip school and walk home through the woods. And it was a good little hike. But we didn't care why. Because we were teenagers. Things had a different way of meaning than they do now, right? You know, as long as you're having fun, it didn't really mean that much. You could do anything.
Until you get caught.
So then, until you get caught, that's right. And then we would be having a different story. In the ending,
Got the ending of it.
you got the ending of it most of the time too. It always ended up at the ending anyways. But, so then after I graduated from high school, then I decided to go to college. So, in the beginning again.
Yeah.
So we talk about beginnings, start and stop, starting over, starting anew, changing of our lives, how we perceive things. We may perceive something one way and a couple years later perceive it as something different. And it could be a whole different new start. And in the context of here, we're talking about the Jewish people had a failure. And God had a plan for them to get back in relationship with God. That was the whole reason why they had left Assyria or Iraq and went back to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple, because they had been taken away in captivity. Ain't it amazing how the Bible tells stories, and we could just about almost pick out the ending based on something that had previously happened in the Bible? What happened in the Garden of Eden?
And thrown out for sin.
Why did they done the exact same thing? They had a spiritual failure, didn't it? They decided on their own that they wanted to be knowledgeable. It wasn't that the fruit didn't look good, because the fruit did look good. It was tempting, wasn't it? Ain't it amazing how most tempting things has a shiny cover on it? Something to get your attention. So if you think about going fishing, what's your best lures?
Shiny ones.
The shiny ones, that's right. Why? Things that look like something they really want. I always tell my kids, when it's shiny like that and it looks like something you really, really want, you got to wonder where the hook is. Because once you bite into it, it's too late. You already been hooked. Then you're in the boat. So we've got lessons of that. Why did the flood happen?
The Lord was ready to purge it out.
The Lord is fixing to get rid of everybody and start over. But somebody found favor, didn't they? One person, Noah, but the rest of them had a spiritual failure. And people don't think there's a cost to spiritual failure, but we've got evidence all through the Bible that tells, and even not even in the Bible, in other places, in other books, that tell about what happened to societies when they have a spiritual failure. Where's the Roman Empire? There's no more, is it? It's something that's in the history books. But guess what? Our government is closely related to the Roman government. We based a lot of our government on how the Romans had their government set up. We have elected officials, politicians. We have leaders. And the same thing that happened to the Roman government can happen to our government. So we keep thinking about in the beginning. So the flood happened. Noah, when he stepped off the ark, what was that? That was another beginning, wasn't it? And what happened after that? They started multiplying. Started spreading out. And for some reason, man, always seems to drift back to that spiritual failure. So we focused, the Bible focuses on who? What group of people?
Jews.
The Jews. Why? Because they're God's chosen people. He chose them. Now, could he have chose some other group? He probably could, but he had his reasons, didn't he? Because he already had a plan. From the beginning of time. Because in the beginning there was always what? There was always God. There was always Jesus. And in my studying this week, I come across that. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. There was and there was not. He's the future. He's the past. He's the present. So we think about that beginning, and Noah's group has to start over. Then lo and behold, comes Moses' time. What happens? What had happened? They'd got oppressed. They got caught up in Egypt. There was still a group, just like Noah, there was still a group that stayed solid to that foundation that Christ was going to deliver them. And he did. And where did they go? They went out in the desert and hung out for a couple years, didn't they? Wandering around. How long did it take them to get out of the desert? 40 years. That's a long time. How far could you walk in 40 years?
Longer than they did.
A whole lot further than they did, because why? They just kept going around and around in circles. They said that they did the numbers, and it actually takes from where they started in to where they ended up in Jerusalem. It should have took them about 2 weeks to walk. Took them 40 years. They must have been crawling on their bellies. But it wasn't an easy trip, was it? But they made it there. So now they started creating this Jewish nation. We've got the beginning of the Jewish nation, right? They built the temple, started worshiping God in the temples. And then what happened? Spiritual failure came back in. They started corrupting the temples. The people started getting corrupt and greedy. They started taking things that the Lord told them not to take. Now, what was going on? They were backsliding. Just like in our lives when we backslide away from God. So along came who? The Assyrians. And they destroyed them. They took them into God allowed them to be taken into captivity. He kept telling them, if you don't change, you're gonna get your kingdom taken away. So it happened. So now we're at that point where 70 years have passed. Now 40 years wasn't enough. Now we had to wait 70 years to come back to Jerusalem. Now, when they came back, what was their first thing to do? Well, they had to set up some form of places to live, right? And I'm thinking, in my vision, well, there's a bunch of rubble of where the old city used to be. And then I get to reading in my lesson, and I realize there's already people there. So they probably people had already started building things. And it wasn't so much the rubble. It just didn't have the glory that it had before they left, when it got destroyed. All right, and that's going to lead us into this section 1. It says, take advantage of God's given opportunities for renewal. Each one of us has been given an opportunity for renewal. And when we're reading this lesson, think about how far you came and where your beginnings were. And what beginnings are of the importance to you. It says, when the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, their people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Despite their fears of peoples around them, they built their altar on its foundations and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Festival of Tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as freewill offerings to the Lord. And on the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, through the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. How many of you are glad we no longer have to worry about presenting offerings, live offerings to the Lord?
Amen.
And following all these festivals? It would get confusing after a while. Now, a lot of this still goes on over in that part of the world. It's a little bit different than it was back then. But it became more of a what? Okay, if I told everybody that we had to come in here on Monday for the festivals of cleaning the floors, and then I tell you, well, we got to be here on Tuesday at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day, to have festival of cleaning the windows. And then we have an offering. We need to be able to have it on Wednesday. We'll come on Wednesdays and we'll say we got to have an offering. You get my drift? And we keep stacking things on top of people. And then what does it feel like? Oh, it feels like Sunday morning. Well, I got to go to church. Well, I better get up. I got my routine, right? And a lot of people get used to that, being in that routine. No. We set a day aside, right? Or we try to set a day aside. Theirs was based on a calendar. Just like ours is based on a calendar. We know today's Sunday, right? Does it have to be Sunday? Used to be everybody told, oh, you got to go to church on Sundays. But when's the Sabbath day?
It's Saturday.
Technically, according to Jewish people, it's on Saturday. But when is the Sabbath day? It's when you decide to honor the Lord and to come and be in His presence. And what day is that?
Every day.
Should be every day that we're breathing. So every day is a Sabbath day. Okay. It says, when the seventh month came, the scriptural account carefully indicated that time of element in this return of the Jews to their beloved city of David. The writer had already noted that the 70 years of Jeremiah's prophecy had passed and God was working out political change that would make it possible for the Jews to return to their own homeland. Now the timing of the seventh month was also significant. What's the timing? We talk about 7 months, 7th year, 70 years.
Completion.
That number of 7 is completion. That's right. So it says, now the timing of the 7th month was also significant. This month corresponded to our September and October, which was a great month of Jewish worship. The main event was the great festivals of the tabernacles, but the Jews were also obligated for the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord. The problem was that there was no altar on which to offer the sacrifices and no temple at which they could gather for worship. Getting back to Jerusalem was not enough. The altar and the temple were still in ruins. The time had come to draw near to God and to restore the means of grace. The place and the patterns of worship they had known long years before. They could not really be God's people without having an altar and a temple. It says, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. This is a story of collective new beginning. In some manner, not clearly indicated, perhaps in response to the preaching of the prophet Haggai, they all sensed that it was time to come together and make a restored temple their first priority. God had brought them back, but there was work for them to do. God also sent the right people to minister at the right time. Joshua, son of Zodak, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel. These two men were unquestioned integrity in the Hebrew lineage. Joshua was the descendant of Aaron, while Zerubbabel was from the line of King David. The theme of pure ancestry is a significant one throughout Ezra and Nehemiah. What a combination. God's timing and God's people. God's timing is all right, and He always works through people He has prepared. It is important to take advantage of God's timing to understand His plans and purposes and how to be responsive to the message He sends through His chosen servants. Now, I'm just going to do question 1. It says, identify God's timing of events or circumstances in your life that resulted in a sense of renewal for you. Now, did God have a specific timing for you? How do we know what God's timing is? How many of you still think God's still working on you? So how do we know when it's finished? You know, I know whenever I put the turkey in the oven the other week and I had the temperature on, how did I know when the turkey was done? Well, I was following these directions. It was saying 10 to 12 minutes per pound. Guess what? That wasn't right.
Right, no, it's not.
Because if I'd have cooked that was an 18-pound turkey. If I'd have cooked that for just 10 minutes, that's 180 minutes. 3 hours. My turkey was done in an hour and 45 minutes. How do you think it would have looked if I'd have left it in there for 3 hours and then opened the door and said, "Whoa, boy, it is done, ain't it?"
Might be a little
Been a
crispy.
crispy turkey.
Actually, I had help. Thomas came and opened up. He said, "Well, that smells good." And he opened up. He said, "That turkey's done." And I said, "You sure? It's supposed to have a couple more hours." He said, "Oh," he said, "that turkey looks done." I said, "Well, let me get my meat thermometer out." I said, "It's supposed to be 165 degrees internal." And I stuck the temperature in there, and it was like 192. I said, "It's done." But we had a system. We knew that we had got to the end, that it was finished, complete. Now, when do we know, as Christians, how do we know and what events happen to say that God's timing for circumstances in our life? How do you go from one chapter to the next chapter? How did I know when I graduated middle school? Well, they made me march up front and I got this little certificate, and then they says, "See you, you're going to a new place." So then I go to high school. How did I know when high school was over?
Graduation.
Oh, yeah, put the cap and gown on, right? Same thing in college. Same thing. So in life, how do we know that we have completed or we have met God's timing?
Graduation.
It's when we change from one thing and we go into something new. Then we got that beginning. Once we start something new, it's a new beginning, right? So when do we become, or each person can be different, but at some point as Christians, we went from being people that wasn't full of the Lord to Christians that are full of the Lord and trying to get fuller. Isn't that a new beginning when you accepted Christ? And then we have different stages of our life in Christ. Because I started going to church when I was real young. Accepted Christ at an early age. But did not truly understand what God's plan was for me till I was almost middle-aged. And accept the calling that God had put before me. Each one was a new step. So we have different beginnings. And that's what I think about when I think about God's time, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't done yet. My temperature hadn't got turned up high enough. Or I hadn't baked long enough. You know, we always hear the story of what makes a diamond. A lot of pressure and a lot of heat. And sometimes God's got to turn up both in your life in order to get you into what He wants you to be. It says, while taking advantage of opportunities is important, we need a plan to guide the work that follows. Now, how many of you know God's plan for you? We got the Bible, God, Jesus, His disciples, have given us a plan that we can follow and have eternal life with Him. Now, my plan might be different than Judy's plan. Because I have different abilities than she has. And a lot of things will be the same. And it's when we start new things. You know, do you think when you start becoming a teacher, is that a beginning? When do you get to the end of being a teacher? It don't stop. There ain't no end to being a teacher. There ain't no end to being a preacher. There ain't no end to being a parent. How many in here is a parent? Everybody in here is a parent. Even Sammy, which ain't never had no kids. But he's a parent. Why? Because our little kids look up to Sammy. They look to Jerry. They look to everybody that's in here for guidance. Now, they may not come to you and say, how do you do this, this, or this? But they're always watching you how you're living and what examples are you providing. It says, follow the blueprint. It's always important. And I think, and in my line of work, it's a must. Because if you don't follow the blueprint, what happens? Either something's going to get left out or something's going to get built wrong. And then you have a different product, don't you? It may work and it may not. Somebody, Kaylee was telling me that she heard somebody saying that they just built a new cookout in the parking lot at the Holly Hill Mall. And that the engineers had built the building backwards. They had put the front of the store on the wrong side. Of course, when I went over, I looked at it and said, well, it really is. The front of the store is facing Dunham's, and the back of the store is facing the highway. But the workability of it, of how you actually go in and come out, is actually going to work better for them. But ain't it amazing? When you don't follow the prints, things can happen. It says, then Joshua, son of Zodiac, and his fellow priest and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of God of Israel to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what is written in God's law of Moses the man. All right. I'm going to skip all the rest of it, and I'm going to section 3. It says, joy is often manifested in different ways among God's people. It says, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the son of Asaph, with cymbals took their places to praise the Lord as prescribed by King David of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love to Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of the joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Now, we're getting into talking about building the temple. And we're talking about the joy of when they laid the foundations. How much joy do you reckon there was when God and Jesus laid the foundation of this world? And when I started thinking about this, I started thinking about the bigger picture. You know, we get wrapped up in reading the lesson. We're thinking that they're building an altar and they're building a church, right? But what did Jesus say about our altar and our temple? Here it is. I am the altar and I am the temple. When Jesus came, he made it to where I could go directly to God and talk directly with God through the Holy Spirit. Now, is it good to come down here to the altar? Oh, yeah. But we don't have to have the altar to be saved. We don't have to have the altar to have our prayers heard. But when we want to be in community with one another and we want to show favor to the Lord, this is where we need to come. And that's what they were praising and celebrating. What do you think happens in heaven whenever a sinner comes to know Jesus and repents?
They rejoice.
Well, they're rejoicing. And there's a great noise all through heaven. What do you reckon the noise is going to be like when we finally get out of this beginning and we get to the end? Because we know that when this is over and we all are hopefully taken into heaven is going to be a what?
Celebration.
It's going to be a new beginning. That's exactly right. A new beginning with no ending. And what's going to be there? And what ain't going to be there?
The devil.
Death, sin.
There's going to be no longer a need for that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's only going to be the good. Because we're going to have went all the way back to where the time was before Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. Where we walk in fellowship directly with God. In this unbelievable place where you can just walk around and pick fruit from the trees. You ever think about that? And that gets your mind turning of what heaven's really going to be like? And what kind of celebration and how much noise is going to be there? Well, if you don't like singing and you don't like music, you probably won't like heaven. Because they're going to have cymbals up there. Any of y'all know what cymbals are? You ever seen them?
Oh, yeah.
Could you imagine a couple 100 million people beating on cymbals? All at once, in tune? I know what it is whenever when you're in the house and your daughter's beating on with a drum. And you're trying to sleep. Cut that racket out. But in heaven, we ain't going to have no need for no sleep.
I like with Tim when he was learning to play the trumpet. I'd make him go down the edge of the woods.
That's right. But think about it. New beginnings. When we have babies, that's a new beginning.
Get married.
You get married, that's a new beginning. There's lots of new beginnings in life. Here shortly, we're going to be beginning the new year.
When you become parents for the
Yes,
first time.
that's right. But we talk about a lot of beginnings, but ultimately when it all comes down, there's going to be one beginning in the beginning, and then there's going to be another beginning whenever we begin that life with Jesus in heaven. That eternity life. You know, we talk about, you know, I was talking with Barbara this morning and with Bonnie about Little Roger's ex-wife passing away. And I was like, okay, well, do they have any plans? And I figured they probably don't. They probably didn't have no plans. So now somebody has to make plans. And then Barbara said, well, I already know what I'm going to be. She said, I already got my headstone out there and I know where I'm going to be. And y'all better put me there. And I said, well, I'm going to put your body there, but I hope in your soul ain't nowhere near there. And I said, ain't it good that you already know where you're going?
Amen.
And I says, you don't have to worry about things like that. And your family doesn't have to worry about things like that. I was so happy whenever Daddy passed away that he had already taken care of all that. So I didn't have that to worry about. It was already taken care of. Had a plan. Now, of course, we tweaked the plan. But the biggest thing was, and I can just imagine things to just happen, suddenly. How bad would it have been had the outcome been different with your son? They're probably like me, they ain't prepared. I'm not prepared. I got my thought, but if I'm gone, have you ever told anybody what your plans are? May not be a bad idea. And as I got older, I concerned myself more with it. Sharon knows what to do with me, and I know what she wants done. And my kids know what we want done, but we haven't made arrangements, but we do have life insurance, so that's one thing they don't have to worry about. But through life's the same way. Through Christian. How are we preparing? Are we living life as a new beginning? You know, we got the blessings from the Lord. We shed rid of those sins whenever we gave it up here at the altar. We asked the Lord to come into our heart. We got that new beginning. We got that new heart. Now the question is, are we exercising it? Are you staying in shape? Yeah, rounds of shape. But think about it. Do we exercise our spiritual body? How often do we exercise it? Do you get your heart rate up? You know, I know Jeff, sometimes he looks out here and, okay, I hear crickets. And then other times we kind of get excited. That'll get your heart rate up, won't it? But that's where we're at in life. We want to have that joy. Now I started to go with the joy of the new beginning. But I figured we'd save joy for next week. Because when you start unpacking the word joy and what it really means, it's a lot of different things. Because the question I always come back is, what gives you joy in your life? And how do you know you received joy? All right, that's all I've got for today. I started late and I got done a little bit late. So, Jeff, I have to go over a little bit.